Some silences last so long that people forget a voice was ever there. For 7 years, Queen Elara of Valdenmoor said almost nothing in public, a nod here, a gloved wave there, while a whole kingdom decided it understood her. They called her cold. They called her fragile. They said she had never recovered from losing her third child at birth. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew that on a rain-soaked morning, standing before a room full of people who had spent years talking about her, Elara would finally open her mouth and say only 4 words. 4 words that would empty the color from every face in the hall. This is the story of what she had been hiding, why she stayed quiet for so long, and what finally made her speak. The morning began like any state occasion in the palace at Valdenmoor. Servants moved through the marble corridors carrying silver trays, their footsteps swallowed by the long red carpets. Rain streaked the tall windows, blurring the gardens outside into smears of gray and green. In the east wing, Queen Elara sat before a tall mirror while her attendant, Murin, pinned her hair into place. Neither of them spoke. They had done this 1,000 times, and words were no longer necessary between them. Elara was 39, though the strain of the last years had settled into the corners of her eyes. She was known throughout the kingdom as the Silent Queen, a title she had never chosen and never corrected. It was easier to let people believe what they wanted. If they thought her cold, they left her alone. If they thought her broken, they lowered their voices and looked away. Both suited her. Both kept her secret safe. Today was the annual Founding Day address, a ceremony older than the palace itself. Every year, the royal family gathered in the great hall to honor the kingdom's founders, and every year Elara stood beside her husband, King Aldrich, and said nothing at all. The people had stopped expecting her to speak. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. But as Murin fastened the final pin, Elara caught her own reflection and felt something shift behind her ribs, a tightness she had carried for 7 years. She thought of a small stone cottage far to the north, past the pine forests, where a boy of 6 was waking to the same gray rain. A boy with her eyes. A boy no one in this palace knew existed. "Your Majesty," Murin said softly, "it is time." Elara rose. She smoothed the front of her gown with hands that did not quite steady. Somewhere down that long corridor, the great hall was filling with nobles and ministers and reporters, all of them ready to watch the Silent Queen be silent once more. She walked toward the door. For the first time in 7 years, she was not certain she would stay quiet. The great hall of Valdenmoor could hold 400 people, and today it held every one of them. Ministers in dark coats filled the front rows. Behind them sat the noble families, the visiting envoys, the palace correspondents with their notebooks open. Chandeliers burned overhead despite the daylight, throwing warm gold across a room full of cold curiosity. Everyone had come to see the royal family. Only a few had come to see her. King Aldrich stood at the podium, tall and certain, his voice filling the hall with the familiar words of Founding Day. He spoke of duty, of legacy, of the unbroken line that had ruled Valdenmoor for 300 years. The crowd listened the way crowds always listened to kings, politely, patiently, waiting for the moment they could applaud and go home. Elara stood 3 steps behind him, her hands folded, her face still. She was not listening to Aldrich. She was watching the reporters. One of them, a young woman near the back, kept glancing at Elara instead of the king, her pen unmoving. Elara wondered what the girl saw. A queen made of porcelain, probably. A woman who had been photographed 1,000 times and known by no one. What none of them knew was that 7 years ago, Elara had given birth not to a stillborn child, as the palace had announced, but to a healthy boy. And the announcement had not been a mistake. It had been a decision made in a locked room by men who believed a 4th child threatened everything. The line of succession had been settled. A 4th heir, they argued, would fracture it. There had been complications, they said. There had been risk. And so a story was written. A grave was dug with nothing in it, and a newborn was carried north in the dark to a family who would raise him without ever knowing whose son he was. Elara had agreed to it. That was the part she could never forgive. Grieving, exhausted, frightened by the men who surrounded her bed, she had signed her name to a lie because she had been too weak to fight. She had spent every day since paying for that signature. She had found the cottage. She had learned the boy's name. She visited twice a year in disguise, a veiled woman who brought gifts and never explained herself, and she left each time with her heart torn a little further open. At the podium, Aldrich was nearing the end. "And so we honor those who built what we protect," he said, "and we look to the future with steady hearts." He turned, as he always did, to gesture toward his silent queen, a courtesy, a formality. No one expected anything from it. But this time, Elara stepped forward. The movement was so small that at first no one understood it. Aldrich's hand, extended toward her out of habit, hung in the air a moment too long. A murmur passed through the front rows, a shifting of coats, a turning of heads. The queen had moved. The queen was walking toward the podium. Aldrich's expression flickered, the practiced calm slipping for just a breath before he recovered it. He leaned slightly, as if to guide her back, but Elara did not stop. She reached the podium and placed both hands on its polished edge. The young reporter at the back sat up straight. 400 people fell utterly silent. For a long moment Elara said nothing, and the old assumption began to settle again over the room, that she would falter, that she would smile faintly and step back, that the silent queen would remain what she had always been. She could feel the weight of 7 years pressing on her shoulders, urging her to retreat. It would be so easy. One more day of silence. One more year. The boy would keep growing in his cottage, safe and unknown, and no one would ever have to face what had been done. But she thought of his eyes, her eyes. She thought of the grave with nothing in it and the name she had signed. She thought of every gloved one in that hall who had looked at her with pity and never once with understanding. She lifted her head and looked out at them all, the ministers who had planned it, the nobles who had believed it, her husband standing frozen at her side. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but the hall was so silent that it reached every corner. "I have another son," she said. The 4 words fell like stones into still water. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then the room seemed to break apart at once, a gasp near the front, a minister rising from his chair, notebooks flipping open, the low roar of 400 people speaking at the same time. Aldrich's face had gone the color of ash. He reached for her arm and she stepped away from him, out of his reach, into the light. She was not finished. She told them everything, the locked room, the false announcement, the empty grave, the cottage in the north, the men who had decided a mother's child was a problem to be buried. She named them. She watched them shrink under their own names spoken aloud, and when she finished, she did not lower her eyes. The silent queen had broken her silence at last. Whatever came next, scandal, exile, the unraveling of a 300-year line, she would face it with her voice, not without it. For the first time in 7 years, Elara felt the weight lift from her chest. Somewhere far to the north, a boy with her eyes was waking to the rain, and soon, at last, the whole kingdom would know his name.